And a few things that emerge for me, which might be more generic points around, who, what is the catalyst for networks? I mean, are these active choices, are these phenomena that exist largely as a response to failures elsewhere within the kind of global governance space? Also the issue of accountability, which I know you do raise in here, but, to whom and how, in a sense, are these new sorts of networks accountable? Which in and of itself has always been a bit of an issue for some of the international organisations. And finally, how much of the informality of the kind of sets of rules around these kinds of networks raises the possibility of the kind of capture that Leo mentioned in his description of the role of the G7 within the G20, and how much of that is a risk, if you like, to network futures, the real possibility of capture. Anyway, Ben, I'm going to pass over to you for some reflections, and then straight over to you afterwards, Owen, for some thoughts from you.
Great, thank you. I'm going to talk not as a specialist in the G20, but someone that works within a network housed here at ODI, and also someone that's done quite a lot of research and provided lots of advice to different kinds of networks which are admittedly rather less high power than the ones that are discussed in this particular book, tend to consist of mid-level officials within aid agencies or developing country governments. ALNAP in particular is made up of the major international agencies involved in humanitarian relief, so the UN agencies, the donors, the Red Cross and the NGOs. And we're focused on humanitarian performance, so from the perspective of insiders, that's an impossibly broad agenda, and from the perspective of outsiders, that's quite a narrow and parochial agenda. But in terms of the framework which is presented in the book, we do work to set new agendas for our membership. We try and build consensus around them. We try and facilitate knowledge exchange, and we do try and set some norms, particularly around issues of evaluation and accountability. In relation to the role of developing country governments in ALNAP, we have actually tried to bring them into the debate and discussion for quite some time. But the question we always get asked is, why should we get involved in your club? What is the point? And I guess we always say that there's a knowledge, there's a capacity issue. There are ways in which developing country governments can learn more about international disaster response and do it better. But actually, it's not that advantageous for them to engage. One Sri Lankan government official after the tsunami said, "I don't know which wave was worse, the first one of water or the second one of aid that followed." And in that situation, asking for developing country governments, and I'm just giving this to you as an example, to engage in these new networks which may have emerged because of agendas that weren't their own and from areas geographically that aren't their own. Cynically, all you're doing is asking for a symbolic vote, a symbolic representation, and there's not much in the work on the G20 that's been presented and highlighted in the book that actually makes me think any different to that at these more high-powered networks. A lot of this actually highlights, the book does actually go on and highlight a number of other areas where networks can play a really important role. And for my money, I think the really important thing is around helping international organisations adapt to changing realities on the ground. And particularly the idea of responding to crises, the financial crisis, the food crisis and the fuel crisis. And in that sense, I really welcome the attempt to move beyond a functionalist approach to network, to explicitly consider power and politics, and try and ask why developing country governments should be engaging in these particular networks. I'm not sure that it actually answers the question that clearly. From my point of view, the powerful will never really cede power willingly. They may cede ownership of a network as a symbolic gesture, but they won't actually cede leadership of these key issues. And if you look at the range of points that Leonardo covered, the G20 compared to the G7 compared to developing country positions, the two that stood out which went beyond the G7, CFT and AML, were ones where you needed developing country engagement. The others, there wasn't significant move beyond the G7 positions. So I haven't really heard much that enables me to be beyond a cynical view that these kinds of networks are really there to provide a kind of symbolic engagement with developing countries rather than a practical one. I think far more interesting for my money are the networks that are actually emerging from the developing countries themselves, where they're trying to take on capacity building and learning as a cross-developing country exercise, because frankly they've got fed up with the idea of international organisations and developed countries playing that role for them.
Thank you very much. Well, some interesting things for us to reflect on. Owen,